All right, ladies and gents, we're talking rail, 10th of October, 2024. And I would like to introduce you, and I don't think he needs any introduction, Prof. Jan Havenga. And he's the Emeritus Professor of Stellenbosch University and also Director of GAIN. And he's going to do the opening address for us. And he's going to tell us some interesting things. Thank you, Prof. Jan, always supporting this forum. We really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry. A huge success story, this forum. The other thing I want to say is I'm not 100% sure whether we're on board, that the RFA is here, the Road Freight Association. There's a rail day. And this is one of the associations in this country that really understands that rail should play its role. If you speak to the CE, he understands that. It's good for road if rail does what it's supposed to do. They invited me, I call myself a rail evangelist. So they invited me to talk at the convention in May. And they gave me the very last spot, and the speaker after me was Evita Bezuidenhout. So, no, before me, just one before me. Today, the speaker that follows me today is Leo Petquin over there. Singular honor for me because Leo was one of the examiners of my PhD. One of the 3 examiners of my PhD. And many of you might know that we base a lot of the work that we do on our freight demand model. My original challenge to create the freight demand model and the design of that model comes from Leo. So Leo and I will forever be thankful for that. It changed my life. So thank you for that. So let's take this title. And when you look at the title here, I'm going to clear up a misunderstanding with a very close friend of mine who's in this audience. When I first mentioned this title, immediately they jumped towards, state capture. Now, the first time when I thought about this title is when I realized that the economic history of our railway needs to be written up with special focus of the recent history, the history that we are living in. So I am recording it. And I'm going to do under the writer thing or something. He's much more important than me, but eventually it will be written up if I survive. And the reason why I mention it and the reason why I mention this title is one of the first people I discussed the title with in its current form is somebody that some of you will remember fondly, I think, to some extent, which is Bram Leroux. So Bram and myself, yes. And Bram and myself had quite a bit of correspondence about this title. Now, sadly, he passed away, I think, Leo in 2011. So that was before state capture. This train robbery that we're talking about in South Africa is much older than state capture. That is just an event where we are now. So I'll do what I call a small peek at history, and I'll look at one graph, just one graph to explain this and talk about this. We planned this thing in 1910. We planned this robbery in 1910. Why? Because through the Act of the Union, we created the railway as we know it today, as we have created our country with its current borders. And in that time, we said, if you go and read the Act of the Union, we said this railway should be run on business principles. We never said how. In fact, what we did is over time, as you see, the growth was quite slow initially. We brought in regulations to protect this thing. To protect this thing. The next thing, if you see a high rise there, that was because we allowed people to cross-subsidize farming produce, initially mining produce. Mining products was initially cross-subsidized because what we did, we said this thing is now protected. So what we'll do, the high-value freight will have to pay for the low-value freight. And farmers will be able to move their milk cans and their grain and their chicks and stuff around. I worked at Bethlehem Station delivering little boxes of chicks to various places and so on. That's where railways were logistics hubs in those times. And we cross-subsidized ourselves into this mess over time. It's as simple as that. But around about 1976, there was a study tour and a hard pressure in South Africa to actually get rid of this regulation. And we knew this is coming. So we knew what happened in 1989 is going to happen. It's going to be deregulated. But luckily, at the same time, we got ourselves these little export lines. So now we can really cross-subsidize ourselves out of this mess with the export lines and not fixing GFB. And you can see what happened with the general freight business. We got to 1990, we created the business, Transnet. And if you talk to Dr. Moorman today, he will tell you two things worried him: the pension fund and the general freight business of the railway. Because we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to fix it. We haven't got money to invest in it. The government refused to invest in the general freight business. We needed new systems, new products, new things like that. But because we had the export lines, we thought, oh, let's sort of make it work some way or the other. And we never, ever got it right. Now, the other important thing that we needed to do is we needed to rationalize this thing. The 20,000 kilometers needed to become 10,000 kilometers. That never got done. So a huge amount of mistakes was made over the years with good intentions, with real good intentions. People that really looked after this, the stewardship was there, but we didn't do the things that we were supposed to do. Yeah, and then we did get to a point where I say, but two bands of merry men and women finished the job for us in the last 15 years. It's as simple as that. We know what happened. We know how it played out, and it is a big problem. If you look at it over time, and on the left-hand side of the graph, you can see one specific thing. If you look at the red one, the relationship between agricultural produce and the GDP of South Africa, agricultural produce on rail now, you'll see the cross-subsidization that I'm talking about. We forget these things. We forget that once a year, when Pete from Kuruman, he will get, or from the R or whatever, he'll go on a train, he'll go to Cape Town, and he will go and fight for cheaper tariffs for farmers, so that we can support commercial farming and make it work in South Africa. And we cross-subsidize this huge network through this process. Eventually, it just caught up with us. You'll see on the right-hand side, and we started investing in equipment for road and not investing in equipment for rail. And over time, this investment just went all the way in the wrong direction. And we had a lot of mistakes that we've made over time. And I say there's a lot of fingerprints on this motor weapon, a lot, including my own. I can go and find my own little fingerprints on this motor weapon. Mistakes that we've made over time that we need to fix. My point about this, it's complicated. It's complicated. It's far more complicated than state capture and missing locomotives. It is not as simple as this. There's a huge amount of things that needs to be fixed, and we need to get there. So we started this process by saying, what is missing? Now, I used to talk about ton kilometers that is missing on rail. I've changed it to tons now because I realize nobody wants to talk about ton kilometers. We're all going to talk about tons. So this is what you see, what we have on our railway at the moment. The percentages on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you will see the absolute tons that we see on rail at the moment, and we see it there. I struggle to read my own, so I don't know why, but you'll see the iron ore exports, the coal mining exports. There's various things that should be on the rail, and it's over there. What has happened over time is we had a complete decline in domestic mining. A lot of it is not there anymore, and I'll say a little bit something more about that. Our intermediate manufacturing, things like steel that you take from Van der Bijl to Volkswagen and stuff like that, it's just not, that siding to siding traffic has disappeared over time. We've given up on a finished palletized market. There's fantastic solutions globally to do it. We need a fleet of inland terminals to connect containers and stuff. We know what to do. We know what other people do in the world. We've just never done it. And there we are. Now, our model can tell us exactly what should be on rail. Now, it doesn't look like a lot because it's in tons, but from ton kilometers, it's actually a lot that is missing. So the pink is just missing. And I'm going to come back to the pink that is missing. The blue is what is on the rail, what is on the road and should be on the road. And 3 years ago, for the first time, the model is 20 years old. For the first time, we added a category that says, what's missing? Nobody could actually move this stuff. It just didn't go. 25 million tons of coal at the time of the Ukrainian war, when the price went to 5,000 rand a ton, just didn't go. That is 125 billion rands of coal didn't make it to the sea. Now, if you add it together, this is lost income for our country, and I'll say a little bit more something about that now. This means if 1 out of every 2 trucks that you see on a rural road that's got a mining commodity on it should not have been there, should not have been there. It means damaged roads. We've got fantastic Sunroll roads. That's great. We've done good work there. We've never prepared for the fact that we'll have all of this produce in the rural areas of South Africa on rural roads. No province is ready for it, and it causes the destruction that we see. The palletized stuff and the manufactured stuff, the siding-to-siding traffic is congesting our corridors. It's causing all of those problems. And we haven't got enough money now to invest so that we can have emerging farmers, junior farmers, subsistence farmers that we want to change into commercial farmers to provide them with correct access to market. So over time, what has happened? We started to lose money. Started to lose a lot of money. Now, the Great Train Robbery, 1963, had a once-off heist of 1.4 billion. That's basically, if you go and read the history about the Great Train Robbery, that's how much was stolen. Now, we're stealing that every day out of our economy. Every day we lose $1 billion. Every day $1 billion is gone. It is as simple as that. Every day we lose $1 billion. And it's been going on for a long time now, the last 2-3 years. It's getting worse and worse and worse as we go along. It's also in terms of emissions, in terms of the environment. I'm not going to go into the detail. We lose about 4.4 million tons of carbon unnecessary. 17%, if you do the calculation, just rail doing what it's supposed to do will take 17% of our freight carbon emissions in this country, if we do it correctly. And then as the coal price went up, we suddenly start seeing these coal trucks. We forgot about this horrible story about the coal trucks with the high coal price, the rail that didn't work the way it should. And I heard somebody said to me, but don't worry, don't worry, the trucks are not so much anymore. Yes, they're not, because the price dropped. That's as simple as that. It's nothing to celebrate. It's nothing to celebrate. The fact that the price dropped, you still don't earn that money into our economy. The price should have stayed high, and we should have moved it to the sea when the price was high by rail. It's as simple as that. Now it works. I will say something more about absolute numbers for passengers later on. But this is passenger numbers and rail freight index to 1910. The red story is not a nice story. I should actually put the GDP of the country also on top of this. But then if you say the red story is not a nice story, you must ask yourself, what does the blue line tell you? Which is passenger numbers in this country, which has really collapsed, completely collapsed. And the task to turn this around is momentous. I have to say that the current management of PRASA has taken up this challenge, and I'm surprised and I am pleased with the work that they are doing to try and fix this. But we must never forget the uphill battle that we're talking about here. I mean, if you look at this graph, you can just see it. This is a massive, massive decline that you try to fix over time. So what happened since the robbery? In the last 3 years, basically, we started seeing the serious decline. I was asked by the South African Institute of Civil Engineers to help them with the countrywide audit of all of the civil engineering assets of South Africa. I did the railway part, started talking to people, and I'm beginning to realize how really, really bad this is. How really bad it is. And how the fact that we had this honest management that followed the state capture management is still not getting this right. There's a huge amount of things that just went wrong. We didn't know how to fix this railway. Operation Vulindlela appointed us 4 researchers. We came, we talked about it. And about 2 years ago at OV, I made a presentation and said, what can we do now? Basically, I said, I think we must put a strong team in place to make rail policy work. We must put Transnet in curatorship. It's as simple as that. We must alienate the export lines from Transnet, give it to people that knows how to run it. And Transnet must focus itself on the core that needs to be fixed. And I'll say something more about it right now. And move the core network to the DOT. Create a thing called SunTrack. And go and put it right next to SunRail and run it according to the same principles and regulations. That was in my proposals 2 years ago. In the last 2 years, what has happened? We have OV that came into existence. The roadmap was announced. We think it's long ago. It was February last year that the President announced the creation of a roadmap in SONA. It's not that long ago. The National Logistics Crisis Committee, I think, has been around now, working, operating for just over a year. It's not much more than a year. So we sometimes, our expectations is very high, but it's quite recent that we've been busy with this. The new transport board has not been around so long, and in some major stumbling blocks. We forget that the announcement that the late Minister Gordhan made, really basically pulled the rug from underneath the previous management of Transnet is just a year ago. Basically happened a year ago. So In the last year, we have the new Transnet leadership team. They're trying their best. They've got nothing to work with. There's no resources. I'll come back to that. We had the freight logistics roadmap through cabinet in December 2020. This also just about 8-9 months ago, 10 months ago. The action labs are beginning to work, but it's stalled, and I'll come back to that as well. There is a general feel of openness. We are all talking to each other. People are cooperating. I think the agendas, people want to make this thing work. I can clearly see that. They want to make this thing work. There's a turnaround plan, but I see no work in terms of visible restructuring of Transnet. There's a lot of talk, but I've not seen any work done that actually the groundwork that needs to be done to get our railway restructured in the way it should. I don't see any real work. I just see the short-term work that's been done. The rest is basically just talk. So why we thought we were winning, but we are struggling. We really are struggling. Why are we struggling? Is it because of politics? A lot of people are saying, you know what, we're going to think about this the way that we thought about Eskom 3 years ago. It's not the same thing because it's not about politics. We're in this wonderful position that everybody actually believes the same thing. Everybody wants to achieve the same thing. We all want rail reform. We all want private sector involvement. We all want, there's nobody that actually disagrees about this. In fact, if you think about our government of national unity, this is not education. This is not healthcare. The parties actually agree about what should happen here, but we're still not getting it right. Is it because Bruce Reynolds and Buster Edwards and Ronnie Bix are still around? Now I'm making a very dangerous statement because some of you might remember who they are. They're the architects of the Great Dane robbery. So is it the fact that I'm going to a parliamentary committee tomorrow and I might meet some interesting people at this parliamentary committee? It's not that either, because I've explained to you before, there are many fingerprints on this motor weapon. The fact that we had that event in our history should not hold us back at this stage. Is it because various actors, and I mentioned in my name, have different agendas? Now, I can tell you those people are listed, or those organizations are listed. What's standing on top of the agendas is all the same. They all want the same thing. But yes, Treasury is looking at it from the point of fiscal security for our country. And they want to protect the fiscus, they believe. Transnet is trying to save the company in its current form. There's problems around that. The presidency is pushing for economic reform in South Africa and private sector participation. And the DOT is supposed to, and I think they are going to do that, protect the supply chains of our country and make the value chains work. And all of these people are busy with good stuff. The DOT is busy with a master planning process, which I think is really good. It's proper. I think it's going to give us the right results. They've got a PSP unit that's pushing the right things in terms of, because we are struggling with PSPs in South Africa. Everybody is doing a lot of good stuff, but we are not pulling all in it. We are not all pulling in the right direction, in the same direction. There's a huge amount of just a little bit of not pulling together over here, which I've seen over the last few months. And I'll say why I say that. If you look at the numbers for Transnet, and this is the weekly numbers in terms of freight, yes, there has been a stabilization. I mean, there was a time that we destroyed the balance sheet. There was a time when infrastructure morale was destroyed. There was a time that we wanted people to do things differently, you know, to do maintenance correctly, to prioritize things correctly, all of that, and we didn't do it. All of that has changed around. There is a stabilization factor that has crept into the system, which is fantastic. And I mean, Zain, my collaborator, when he does research like this, he could have told you a year ago that Transnet will move 139 million tons last year. And they didn't. They moved 152 million tons. And that's because a lot of people jumped in and tried to help. And Transnet itself, with its new leadership, really stemmed the tide of deterioration. But the things that we need to do to lift this thing further up is not in place. Let me just say it right now, it's not in place. If you think right now somebody is fixing the network, they're not. Nobody. If you think somebody's planning on how to fix the network, there's 2 independent assessments that's been done on 2 of the export lines. The terms of reference for the independent assessments for the core line is not even finished yet. So how are we going to fix it? Think about the process that is required to fit. And whatever you do in this country, and whatever plan you come up with, And whatever your network statement says, or whatever tariff you charge, if you don't fix the network, you can't run trains. So there's things that we're just not doing. We are just not doing it. And I can't understand it. So we pushed Transnet and say, please give us a network statement. So they did. With a price that's too high, which we knew it would. Because they include the return on assets, which they shouldn't, for the core network. Because that asset is not in a very good condition. It's incorrectly valued. All of these things start to happen. And I asked myself, and I made this comparison. It's a very simplistic comparison. I can tell you I would love to have the detailed discussion behind the comparison with you. Doesn't matter. Just now, I'll make it simplistic and say, currently, if you take the road and you drive an Interlink down to Cape Town, a road truck, you're going to pay about 7,000 Rand towards the infrastructure. It's fuel levy, it's the license fee, and it's toll fees. If you're going to ask that same Interlink 20 cents gross ton kilometer, it's going to cost that same Interlink 16,000 Rand. Now, that is our very good South African rail to road strategy. That's how it works. When we do things like this, without thinking what we are doing, without putting the science behind this, and I know it's not as simplistic as this. I just want to put it in your face because this is where we are. I mean, this is what we are doing. So what do we do now? Where are we stuck? We must address one of the three largest production factor issues of our nation. It isn't, by the way, medical care or whatever. I'm very worried about it. Education is one of the three. Energy is one, and logistics is one. If we can get those three things right, our nation will bloom, and we will win. We will have an extra R1 billion a day in our economy if we do this right. We will return to the fistus, the 50 million Rand a day, every day, if we do this right. We will create 500 jobs per day, every day, if we do this right. That is the price. That is what we're aiming towards. Now, if that's the price and what we're aiming towards, that will save us from the failed state, by the way. Because if we don't do it, that's it. It's over. I've said it before, it will be a nail in the coffin of a failed state. It's as simple as that. We need to do this. Now, we've done the work, we've looked and we say there's 25 million tons of coal, there's 10 million tons of iron ore, there's 20 million tons on that core that will require a lot of work in terms of finished goods, palletized cargo, Indian terminals, etc. There's 10 million tons on Cape. There's some manganese and a lot of the domestic minerals. We've done the work, we know it is, and go into the detail. If you summarize it, what it is, currently we're at 146 million tons, it should be 247. So the minister and the president is actually quite correct. The missing number is 100 million tons. That is what's missing. If you cut out the short lines, that's what's missing. And that number will be 300 million tons in the year 2050. So that's 154 million tons that we need to find if you go into the future. But I'm looking at that 8th administration because I can clearly see that the president and the minister of transport has got something that they want to achieve by 2030. That's what they want to do. That gap is 128 million tons. 128 million tons. Now they want to add 100 million tons by then. Now I can tell you to add to a point where 80% of all rail-friendly freight is on rail is a huge, huge, huge effort. It's a huge effort. It will require us to work really hard to get us there. I've got another thing I want to tell you. If you take the bulk export lines out of this equation, then currently we have 42 million tons on the rail. There should be 112. There's about 70 million tons missing. It should be 165 million tons by 2050. That means that our general freight railway has to become 4 times bigger than it is right now. That is the big gap. And my statement that I just want to make is 70 million tons is missing here. And by 2050, it should be 4 times bigger. As a nation, we should leave the bulk lines to the freight owners to solve. They know what to do. And we must focus on this problem because we have got no solutions here. The bulk lines is huge gaps in terms of investment, but it's not gaps in terms of thinking. We know what to do. So, and that's my point I want to make. And in the passenger trips we have to look for. Now, this is very interesting. The minister says he wants to get to 600 million passenger trips because she believes in recent history, that's how high we were. Well, we've reached 750 million passengers if you go back a few years. And we should have been at the 1 billion passenger trips right now. We only have plans to take us to 300. She wants to go to 600. So we need to understand how to get there. We said we want to separate. I'm not going to say much about it. We must separate the network from between high density and low density. That work needs to be done. We need to focus on the terminals and things like that. That needs to be separated from this process. We know whether we're successful or not. We know what happened yesterday. We know we need to separate ownership of infrastructure with the operations of the infrastructure, the same way that SANRAL does it. In terms of concessionaires, that looks after the various portions of the network. We know we need to do all of that, but we can't get it right. And why? We can't get it right because we are focusing on a short-term turnaround, and we're getting it right. But every month, and I'm not there, so I'm guessing now, every month if I'm Transnet, I say I have to make payroll, I have to pay the banks, and do the minimum infrastructure maintenance that I can do. And then my money is finished. So if you're not going to restructure this balance sheet of Transnet and get into this problem and solve this problem with a financial model that will make it work, you're just going to have that problem every month. So now you've done all of the things that you can do with minimum stuff, but nobody is actually assessing the network. Nobody is actually investing in the network. It is still just lying there. So it's not going to get better if we don't do this work. It's not going to get better. We have to look at this restructuring balance sheet of Transnet problem, because that will enable us to actually make this work, and eventually restructure Transnet, because that will provide us a firm base of moving forward. It really does. And then a controlled transition if we do this correctly. Now, the most important enabler here is a believable financial model. And I'll say this is one of my last things I want to talk about. And it's this, a note on restructuring. We'll require an understanding of Transnet portfolio. Now, I went and I read again all the work I myself did. If you go back to things like a company like, for instance, Iscor, before it was privatized. Iscor had mines, Iscor had foundries, and things like that. You go and you look at your whole portfolio, look at the types of things that you've got, and you then decide how are you going to organize this whole lot so that you can actually solve what you want to solve. You normally, in restructuring, you ask yourself, what type of portfolio do I have? What is these things? What business typologies are in these portfolios? You ask yourself, what specific units can be described for each of them? And for each unit, you ask yourself, what is it? What does the deal sheet look like? How much money can it make? Is it loss-making? Is it not loss-making? All of this. And eventually you get to the point, if you take Transnet actually has within itself, and Ryk van die Kerk, he once asked me, but can't you just privatize the whole of Transnet? No, you can't, because it's not Iscor. It's got all of these funny things inside of it. Agencies, which is actually more, if you look at the agency, the Port Authority, or TRIM, if you let me still call it that, those are agencies that government should support and sponsor. And those are agencies that should be treated separately and a common good type of things. Then there's businesses. Then there's hybrids. There's hybrids there because it's actually more like a business, but for some reason, maybe we want to look after it for a short while, the same way that we do with agencies. And within each of them, there's this huge myriad of stuff, which in no country in the world is all together like this. No country in the world put the agencies, the businesses together in one company. All the container terminals, everything that you can think is just jumbled together. Now, if you think for these things, we have a corporatized solution or a corporatized summary that looks like this. What is it? What's its value? What's its condition? What is its depth? What is the people that's in there, the performance? What does it do? What does it contribute to the economy? If you think that for each one of those items that you look there, that you see there, we actually have a summary and we know how it works. The way that the normal people that do business turnaround will do it. You know, if you have a business in distress, you will have analysis around us. You will have a portfolio analysis. It does not exist. It still does not exist. This does not exist. I can't give you any sums and numbers or anything like that because nobody's got it. So, and this for me, I just don't understand. We can't do that. My last point about this, if we're not going to get it done, and we don't restructure Transnet the way it should be restructured, if we don't assess the network and do the network assessment that needs to be done, if we don't do a financial model behind this so that we can figure out how we chart the way forward, we're not going to make it work. So I'll finish my last slide. I'll come back to my analogy, my word that I use about the train robbery. So there is a new sheriff in town. That is the other thing, which for me is the glimmer of hope that I've got at the moment, where all of these people with all this wonderful and positive intent can start pulling together around this point. And she has thrown down a challenge. She said, once the 600 million passengers and 250 million tons of freight, we have probably a 300 million passenger and 50 million ton freight planning gap. So what we're giving her at the moment has got that gap in it. But the plans that we are giving her at the moment is not properly funded. So I'm not even talking about the planning gap. We are telling her, oh, we'll get to 200 million tons. We don't have a plan to get to 200 million tons. And she says you need to be at 250. So no, and the president's saying that as well. That planning gap is there. We don't have the resources or the processes in place for even our current plans. It's not in place. There's a huge amount of good intentions, but there's work that needs to be done. There really is. We lost a year. I can tell you that in the last 6 months or so, a lot of the core fundamental things that is required to do to actually make this thing work has not been done. The core fundamental things that's needed to be done. As I've mentioned, things like network assessments, things like a financial model for Transnet, things that without that, we're not going to take this forward. Some of the other things that's done are critically important. I am glad that the master planning process started because we can now use it as the process play out. But these some other fundamental things needs to be done. We've lost a year. So I've seen the challenge. I have not yet seen the answer. We've not really charted the course here that we need to do. The only thing I'm very sure about is good intentions. But we really now need to pick up speed. We really need to pick up speed. Good intentions is not good enough. So I said this 2 years ago in that first presentation of Vulindlela. A year from now, and now it's 2 years from now. We wish you started yesterday, but we still have today. So let's pick this up. Let's speed this up, please, and do the critical thing that needs to be done. We know what it is. Let's get it done.